not German, but Southwest Africa, which is frankly insulting. But regardless, are we ready to discuss movies?
I think we are ready to discuss some movies.
Movies.
Hey, for a nice little change of pace here, let's talk about some movies.
Wait, stop. Have you been recording this whole time?
I did record a little bit of, I got a little bit of the end of our discussion of geography. I didn't get the bit about my pocket dictionary, so...
Well, I guess like the most curious object I've ever owned was like, it was a tiny pocket Bible where like the only way you could read it was getting a little magnifying glass, but it was the full like New Testament and just a little tiny thing you can fit in your fingers.
Yeah.
But regardless, how's your guys' movie week been?
It's been interesting. It's been very interesting.
It's been interesting for me too.
I have quite a few things to talk about here, but before we do that, let us begin. Welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show. This is episode 72, I think.
Back and more existing than ever.
I guess. I'm not sure. I didn't know existing was something that could be done in grades, but there it is.
I suppose. Well, I mean, like, when we get on hiatus, the podcast moves closer to being non-existent, and then when we come back, it then strikes right back to existing.
Yeah, but fortunately, we don't go on hiatus very often.
No, I think the last time was almost like a year ago.
Yeah, well, it's exactly a year ago.
Well, there we go. Anyway, this week we are looking at the French director Jean-Pierre Melville, a slightly lesser-known figure in international cinema, although Les Samouraï seems to be a movie that kind of looms somewhat large in the culture.
Well, he's often regarded as like one of the influencing figures of the French New Wave.
That can't be right. He was working like at the same time and after the French New Wave.
Well, that's it. He's kind of lumped in. Well, the French New Wave is like this big, like, and now like it's just this big non-existent cloud of a movement. And, like, some people are in it and others are not. Like, everything I read about Melville seems like to lump him in with as, like, one of the influencing figures.
I guess. Yeah.
And he was also in Breathless.
And also fought in the French Resistance during World War II.
Yes.
As we will see.
Makes sense.
Yeah. That may or may not definitely play into one of the movies we're going to talk about today. But yeah. But first, let's walk back a bit to discuss our film viewing weeks with what we've been watching.
Reed, what have you been watching?
Okay, I'd like to make a confession.
Yes.
I got I got a 1-month free trial of YouTube Red.
Okay. the most unnecessary streaming service that's ever existed, but go on.
Exactly.
Pretty much, yeah. Which is why I'm going to cancel it in about a month, because it's something...
The moment it becomes unfree.
Yes. So I've basically been just grabbing what I can find and just throwing it into the bin.
Well, granted, that's pretty much where I'm going to be with Netflix. Is like the moment, like, because I don't pay for my own service, it's like a big family thing. The moment that runs out, I am not going to get another service. What you were saying as far as YouTube is concerned? Have you just been watching more Vice documentaries online?
No. No.
If you had, that would be okay.
Yeah, that would be okay.
That would be okay. Actually, I should have watched the Vice documentary. Fuck. Well, okay. I think I can watch. No, never mind. I think I can talk about one I saw a little while back, but it's still fresh in my mind for some
if you
reason.
didn't talk about it on the podcast, it is open game.
Okay. All right. So this was a documentary from like a mini series with this. I forget her name. She's prominent and she talks about sex a lot. But anyways, she did a 20 or 25-minute documentary about pornography in the state of Utah on its makeup of it and how it's viewed in society there. And she starts off by going to a house of someone undercover making what's called Mormon porn.
Well, this sounds interesting.
This does sound interesting.
Which is just Mormon rituals intermixed with porn. That's factually correct.
That's probably the most bizarre thing I think I've heard all week.
Yes. And then it moves to going to meeting a Utah legislature. Keep in mind, this Utah legislature is a body that hardly meets at all, maybe for like a week throughout the whole year, or maybe like a solid month throughout the whole year. And then they just do whatever they want. But anyways, so she meets one of these guys that's drawing up a law to make pornography, like to brand people who watch pornography as people who have diseases. To sort of treat it as diseases. And I remember being, someone's like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But I don't remember the exact points. Moving on. Then for the last bit, she shows a convention addressing pornography in Utah about, and sort of the main message with this is that, it's open to all denominations sort of thing, like this convention was, and it addresses the concerns that pornography had. But the presenter was saying, yeah, pretty much everyone here is Mormon.
So the point of the documentary was to reiterate what we already knew, that Utah is the worst state in the union.
Well, I don't know about that.
I wouldn't say the worst. I wouldn't say the worst state. They have some killer national parks.
John, I don't want you to alienate our probably not our probably non-existent listener base in Utah.
I know people in Utah. It's okay. They're okay. All right. Probably one of the more salient points of this was the presenter was talking with educators on basically teaching children consuming pornography is in sense a disease. But then juxtaposed with that is another educator in the state by saying, look, if we suppress curiosity about sex among children, this is going to lead to significant problems in life. Essentially summing up in barest of terms. So,
well, this sounds very interesting. I mean, I am fascinated by porn, in an academic sense. And
Boogie Nights is one of your favorite movies.
Boogie Nights is one of my favorite movies. And I guess I'm just kind of fascinated by the effect that internet porn may be having on the culture. And, porn addiction is a very real thing, I think. Mm-hmm. And porn addiction and sex addiction are both, fascinating topics to me. I really want to see...
And people trying to ban porn is a thing that keeps happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Although, if consumed responsibly, porn can be a very healthy thing. I think we're all of a like mind on this.
That's kind of where the health community is at the moment.
Yeah.
Sounds right. I guess.
I guess, to me, the most fascinating thing about porn is how it often propels the mediums it decides to go to.
Right.
Porn going to video is what made everyone else go to video.
Right. That porn decided the Betamax VHS war, basically. Yeah.
Regardless, that sounds really interesting. I might go watch that.
I may also watch that.
I'll find it and send the link.
Okay.
Ooh, it's online.
Warner's going to be very confused when that link comes across in the group chat.
He shouldn't be.
just describe it as Mormon porn and just run with it. But is there anything else?
Please don't let that be the title of this video. Please don't let that be the title.
No, I have a plan. I have a plan for the title of this video already.
Okay.
And it's not going to be Mormon porn. We had the porn trilogy. It boosted our numbers a little bit. It got us some very weird suggested videos, and I'd rather not go back to it.
I think we've learned the almighty lesson: sex only sells sex itself. But regardless, have you seen anything else?
I'm gonna say no.
Okay then.
Well, Tyler,
to avoid harsh judgment.
Well, Tyler, what have you seen?
Well, it's interesting. I got kind of into a weird little Disney kick this past week because this week's Vidiots episode was kind of all about Disney.
Yeah, like they watched like Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yes. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. Or maybe I'll just get to it now. I actually watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame, which I had never seen before. It was one of my few 90s Disney blind spots.
Yeah. I've seen. I don't think I've seen all of it, but like I've seen enough of it to be familiar with it.
Yeah.
And it's always fascinated me.
This is not going to be a new point or a particularly revelatory point, but this is a weird movie. This is a very strange movie. It's the parts of it that work really, really do work. It's interesting. This is.
Like, I always hold up like the opening song and Hellfire are two of some of the greatest Disney things that's ever existed.
Well, I was just about to say, this is oddly like maybe the most like Broadway of all of Disney's like musicals. Like they kind of, moved into more of a Broadway mode in the 90s, and they've kind of returned to that more recently. But this movie, just that opening number feels very, very Broadway, and just throughout the movie there's a lot of it feels like it feels very Broadway to me. I'm not sure why exactly, but
I'd say I'd agree with that.
Yeah, but the music in this movie is great. Like some of the best in all of Disney's catalog, I think, and it's kind of appalling that. Well, it's not that appalling that they don't play Hellfire for the kids all the time, but but that opening song is spectacular. The animation in this movie is gorgeous. It's a huge, huge movie.
Like oh my god! Like they make Notre Dame just seems like this towering thing.
It's incredible. Yeah, there's some beautiful stuff in here. Tom Holtz of Amadeus renown does the voice of Quasimodo. He does a very good job. His singing voice is like not the best, but he kind of has that. He kind of has that Anne Hathaway thing of like he's very good at like putting emotion into his singing, so that's all good. The gargoyles are as bad as everyone says they are.
This movie has some of the like worst tonal yo-yoing.
Any
movie I've ever seen.
Yeah,
it's so the fucking goofy sound effects at like the like big dramatic climax.
There are like huge, incredible dramatic moments. There are incredibly beautiful, tender moments in this movie. There are just shocking, like, kind of borderline disturbing moments. Like, this is a Disney movie about, like, lust and obsession and, like, genocide. And then there's also talk
about, like, I want to either fuck or kill this woman, and I can't decide which.
Yeah. And then there's also talking gargoyles who make terrible jokes and pop culture references.
And it's all about, like, Quasimodo fitting in as an ugly duckling.
It's strange. It's very strange that this movie even exists. So what did you say, Reed?
Sorry, I've actually never seen this movie before. Is it worth watching?
I think it's worth watching. There's some very, very cool stuff in it.
Certainly are. Like, if you just watch, like, Hellfire and the opening song, you'd think you'd stumbled upon the best movie Disney's ever made. But then when you watch the whole thing, you go, ooh, there's some problems here.
I don't know. It largely worked for me. I liked it quite a bit, actually, and I think it's very impressive that this movie like got made at all. And
I think I remember like when like Doug Walker does this whole like Disney December thing, and when he got to this movie, he's like, just say the title. Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Just think of that for a moment.
Yeah, it's weird. But there's great stuff in it. There's that sequence with the Feast of Fools where they sing the big, like, topsy-turvy song. There's a lot of really cool animation in that, really cool imagery. I like it. It's an interesting movie. It's one of the strangest ones in Disney's oeuvre. So I'd say it's worth checking out if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I think it's the most fascinating of the Disney, like the late 90s Disney films.
Yeah. But just to continue this thread, I don't know if we've ever really talked about this on the podcast or otherwise, but like the modern Disney history like really fascinates me. Like everything from like the 80s when Eisner and Katzenberg came in, like all the way up through like the present day, basically, like all that stuff.
Like the internal politics of Disney are dictating.
Yeah, it's so like it's like borderline Shakespearean at times, and it's very. I just find it very fascinating. So I watched a couple of documentaries that kind of delve into some of this stuff. One is extremely legitimate, and one is extremely not legitimate. The legitimate one is Waking Sleeping Beauty, which I think came out in like 2009, I want to say. Don't quote me on that. This is a Disney-sponsored, Disney seal of approval documentary. But it's good. It's about, like, kind of the Disney Renaissance. Like, it starts with, like, kind of the mid-'80s period when they were really... It's so strange to think about it now, but, like, Disney was at one point, like, in danger of, like, being taken over by, like, corporate, like, villains, basically.
In like, the 70s and 80s, people were really thinking, like, is Disney going to survive?
Yeah.
That was a real thing.
So this documentary, like, takes you through, like, the production of, like, The Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company and, like, Disney's kind of beginning of resurgence. You see, like, Don Bluth leaving the company. You see Eisner and Katzenberg coming in. It's a good documentary. It's pretty, like, by the numbers, but it's good if that, like, period in history interests you at all. They have a whole great sequence where they show you, like, Howard Ashman, like, working on Beauty and the Beast, like, as he's dying, basically. Yeah, it's an interesting documentary. I think I've seen it, like, twice. It's a nice little interesting account of this period. And then I also watched a little movie called The Sweatbox. Have you heard of this?
I've not heard of The Sweatbox.
Okay, this is a documentary that was never actually officially released. It was made by Sting, the musician Sting. It was made by his wife during the production of The Emperor's New Groove. Now, let me elaborate here. Emperor's New Groove began production as like conceived as like a big epic musical, like in the style of The Lion King. It was called Kingdom of the Sun. And they brought in Sting to write the songs for it.
That I didn't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. You see all kinds of like early like storyboards and stuff. Some elements of it are like already there. Like Yzma was basically the same character like from the beginning. Eartha Kitt was there already.
Well, I've seen the storyboards for it because like the background behind The Emperor's New Groove is kind of something that's pretty infamous.
Yeah.
How infamous are we talking?
Well, it's just well known. That's
if you're into this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm not into this sort of thing.
Yeah. Anyway, you see Sting like recording songs, like big numbers. You see the voice recording. So like the original story was conceived as like a Prince and the Pauper type of thing. So like Pacho was originally like a lookalike of Kuzco. Do you know, and you see footage of the voice actors, now they had David Spade, like, right from the get-go as Kuzco. Do you know who the original voice of Pacha was before he became, like, this John Goodman figure, but when he was a lookalike of Kuzco? This was, like, 97, 98. You see footage of this person, like, recording the voice. Do you know who it was?
I gotta know, tell me.
It was Owen Wilson, like, fresh off of Bottle Rocket, like, coming in and we're doing a voice for Disney.
Not bad. Not bad.
You need a David Spade lookalike. I don't know why you'd ever need that.
It amazes me, because, like, this is before Owen Wilson was, like, a big star. Like, this was, like, like, Rushmore and Tenenbaums, even. Like, and he's not even in Rushmore. Like, they must have, like, seen... Some Disney person must have seen Bottle Rocket and been like, hey, let's get that guy. So, yeah. And then you see, like, the executives come in and watch, like, a story reel, and they're like, this is terrible, you have to start over. And, the director leaves the project, it's reworked into, like, a buddy comedy. They still want Sting to, like, do some song, like, make some kind of contribution. And you see him, like, I didn't know it was going to go on this long. I thought I'd be done by now. I'm doing an album, I'm on tour, but, like, I still want to do a song.
I need Disney.
It's so weird. And then Like, there's this one point where, like, I think the original ending of the movie, like, Kuzco, like, still built his, like, water slide, like, amusement park. Like, he just built it somewhere else. That was, like, his arc of the movie, and, like, Sting literally sends them a letter, and he's like, I think the point of this movie should be it's family and friends that are important, not water slides. And the executives get it, and they're like, oh, that's a really good note. So, you have to be on the sketchy side of the law to see this movie, but the Sweatbox is a fascinating look behind the scenes of behind the curtain of Disney.
This sounds insane.
It's pretty insane. This is already running a bit long, so I'm going to try and speed through some of these. Okay. I finally watched a movie that looms large in our collective mythos. That would be The Lonely Island's Hot Rod.
What? Wait. No one made you do this.
No one made me do this. No, but look, I kind of wanted to see it out of maybe morbid curiosity, and
it's only really because of Vidiot's lore. And,
yeah, like, more or less.
Smackdown that happened during that episode.
But I'll tell you what, I kind of liked Hot Rod. It's very much in the vein of something like Roller Town, which I enjoy quite a bit.
Okay. Well, granted, the only thing I know of Roller Town is that genius little bit you sent us, so I haven't seen the whole of Roller Town.
Yeah, it's just an excuse. It's just a bunch of, like, very kind of absurd non sequitur gags. Although I will say, this movie, I'm not sure if they were smart enough to actually recognize this, but it seems like every scene in this movie, like, spoofs like a cliche scene that's been in like 100 other movies, but like they play it for comedy where a more serious movie would play it straight. And
interesting.
I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, I kind of don't want to touch this film with a 100-foot pole.
I really don't think you would like it, but I had a pretty good time watching it.
Okay, that good.
Speaking of a pretty good time,
there wasn't any clock in there though.
There was nothing that approaches the genius of Fuck a Clock.
Well, Fuck a Clock is just a thing all its own.
Yeah. Speaking of a pretty good time, I saw a movie called Good Time, starring Mr. Robert Pattinson. It's good. It's a good movie. It's not amazing, but there is like a 30-40 minute stretch in the middle that is really quite extraordinary. And Robert Pattinson is great throughout. He's like completed his transformation into a very, very interesting character actor, and he's great. This movie has...
Oh, yeah, this was the batshit crazy trailer you sent us.
Yeah. This movie has flashes of After Hours. It lacks kind of just the raw, like, streak of dark humor that After Hours has, but still worth checking out, I think. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
After Hours was made by a genius, and Good Time seems to have been made by a good director.
Yeah. Well, a pair of good directors. It's a pair of brothers, one of whom actually acts in the movie. But it's a good movie. Let's see, what else? I saw Logan Lucky.
Ooh, finally!
That movie is a rollicking good time. I really would like to see more Steven Soderbergh movies at some point. That's something we've been dancing around for a long time.
That's just a collective blind spot we have.
Yeah, but Logan Lucky is a very, very fun movie. I usually hate actors doing fake Southern accents, but I enjoyed this movie a lot without it having to get on my nerves too much. Just a very fun movie. Daniel Craig is great.
I didn't know Daniel Craig was in it.
You didn't know Daniel Craig was in it?
No.
Oh, you are in for a treat, my boy.
Well, I will say this, like, the Southern accent is just so naturally reductive that it is really fucking hard to make it convincing.
Yeah, but they do a pretty good job with it. The centerpiece heist of this movie is just brilliant. There's an incredible scene in a prison where the prisoners are, like, holding the guards hostage, and they have a discussion about Game of Thrones. It's fantastic. I don't want to spoil it too much.
Interesting.
That's a really, really fun movie. I also saw, same day as a matter of fact, Taylor Sheridan's Wind River, which is...
How's that?
Exactly the opposite of the feel-good movie of the year. This is a this is a tough movie. It's good. It's not quite up to the level of Sicario, and especially Hell or High Water. I mean, I just think Hell or High Water will go down as like one of the best movies this decade.
Oh yeah, Hell or High Water is a masterpiece.
I really like Sicario too, though. But this movie's good. What happens is Jeremy Renner is like a fish and wildlife like officer on the Wind River Indian Reservation. He discovers like a dead girl like out in the snow. An FBI agent played by Elizabeth Olsen is brought in to help investigate the death. It's a good movie. Again, it is tough. Like I was like I kind of had a
am I old enough for this movie?
not so much that. Just like I was kind of on edge for like the entire movie. There's a sequence that is very, very difficult to watch in it, but it's good. It's again, there are some flaws in it. Taylor Sheridan, I still think is a really good screenwriter. He does succumb to some of the like typical screenwriting pitfalls that he avoided in his last couple movies. Also, like, Elizabeth Olsen in this movie is playing basically the same character that Emily Blunt played in Sicario, which is like a female federal agent who comes into a case and like is unable to do anything, which really worked in Sicario because Emily Blunt was kind of the audience surrogate in that movie, and in this movie Elizabeth Olsen is just kind of a little bit more sidelined. But she does good stuff. Jeremy Renner is very, very good in this movie. Gil Birmingham, from Jeff Bridges' like partner from Hell or High Water, comes in playing a Native American man living on the reservation. He's only in the movie for like 5 minutes, and he's incredible. This movie is not for those with weak stomachs, but it's good. I would recommend it.
It does sound really interesting.
It's so specific. Taylor Sheridan is great at like writing these really, really like specific environments for his movies, and he also directed this movie. And he shows promise as a director. I think I'm excited to see what he does next.
He knows how to pick a backdrop. This boy.
Yeah. All right, and then just one more thing here. I watched a little movie called High Noon.
High Noon.
This movie is all right. This is one that tends to come up a lot, you know, in the best movies of all time lists. I think it's okay. It's got an interesting thing where it like takes place pretty much in real time, so that's interesting. Gary Cooper gives a pretty good performance. There's good stuff about it. It's kind of boring sometimes. I don't know. It's no like if I were recommending westerns, I would probably first recommend like Stagecoach and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, or even The Searchers.
Well, the Searchers I think is one where like if you want something really interesting, you go there.
High Noon is it's okay. I wouldn't say it's nearly as essential as people make it out to be.
Interesting.
So I was kind of underwhelmed by that.
I still have like a massive hole in like my classic Western watching experience. I think John Ford films are the only thing I've seen. Yeah. So
I also have a bit of a hole. I've only seen one of the Sergio Leone Dollars movies. I've only seen the first one, so those are something I may have to pick up the slack with at some point.
I haven't even seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So
I have not either.
I've not either.
We are hack from. Maybe later.
Maybe later. That movie is very long. All right, so that's what I've been watching. John, what have you seen lately?
What have I been watching? Well, one of the things I saw it on Friday for a class. It is a documentary based on the Ferguson protests, and it's called Who Streets, kind of based off of like one of the.
Oh yes, I've heard of this.
Yes, have you heard of it? Yeah, as far as it's pretty much. I think this is like it's just made by two guys, pretty much, who went into the mix of this with cameras. I think this is their first film.
Okay.
And I think they're also like this is the first time they've ever done anything filmmaking related, so it's kind of interesting in that way. But it focuses on like it pretty much maps out chronologically the Ferguson protests and riots. Right from when Michael Brown is shot, and we see like people congregating around the body and like police behavior there, all the way up to like the massive demonstrations in St. Louis afterward. records, and also some of like the consequences of their protests. And one of the it's a really, I think the most interesting thing about the movie is like our relationship to media in it, because one of the things that's reiterated a lot is that like you motherfuckers come here with MSNBC and shoot all this stuff, and then you guys leave. I still have to live here.
Yeah.
This shit stays after you go home. And, like, this sort of, like, truncated view we're given of events by news coverage. And there's also just sort of, like, some of the racism you see is just utterly appalling. Like, we read the police report of someone who was arrested for a protest, and they describe her as doing tribal chants. Oh. Which is just racist on a level I can't really imagine. It is and often it is a kind of movie that pretty much it takes you down on the floor and pretty much gives you a strictly protest-heavy depiction, because so much of our experience is from the ground up, from police reports and from Brian Williams on NBC at 6.
Yeah,
and so that's really interesting. I will say this, is that like it's kind of odd that like the movie seems to end on a fairly optimistic note, because like a lot of the movies like following like particular protesters and we all see them having families and describe like, I want my child to grow up in a world that in a better world than the one I live with. I want my daughter to not have to do the things I'm doing. And like there's some issues of like where like some of the kids say like, I don't know if my mother's going to come back alive from these things just by the nature of them.
Yeah.
But like it kind of reminds me of when like when Masha Gessen wrote her Putin book, and she finished it right around the time when like the protests were ramping up, and she wrote this kind of optimistic epilogue. And now anytime she talks about that book, she says, "Yeah, I would not write that epilogue now." And so I just kind of think like maybe you guys should be a little bit less optimistic than you're being, given who is now at the right, especially because there's a lot of we see like a lot of President Obama in the moment, and just contrasting him with what we have now, you just kind of go, oh boy,
yeah,
it's so much worse now.
Yeah,
but still, like, fascinating documentary, utterly fascinating. I highly recommend it. As far as it is like a really powerful take of like the Ferguson example of the Ferguson incident.
Yeah.
Another thing is, I think that's the last of our documentary heavy week. Another thing I watched was I had some time and decided, I'm going to watch a Powell and Pressburger movie. So I watched. I'm just going to get some information on it because I kind of just want to like give it to you verbatim.
Okay.
Because it's one of the stranger movies I've seen.
Okay. Was it? Can I guess which one it was?
You probably know. Was
it A Matter of Life and Death?
Yes, it was.
I have heard about this movie, and it sounds kind of awesome and kind of bananas.
Okay. The movie starts with, you get this massive, like, composite animation of, like, the universe, and someone's narrating it and going, do you see that black spot right there? That is where the stars are not, and they appear like inky black stars. And it is like this charming British tautology about like the universe, and then we go, there's Earth. And then we cut to a man in a bomber that is about to go down. Like everyone else is dead, like he's the only one left. And like he starts radioing the poetry to like one of the operators, and then they just him and like the radio operator start talking, and then they fall in love over the radio. And then like he jumps out, and then we cut to the movie's depiction of heaven, I think, where it's like it is like this. It's one of the most fascinating depictions of the afterlife I think I've ever seen. Where it's like it's this ultra bureaucratic thing where like one of the people who was on the plane was like, "I'm waiting for the pilot. He's supposed to be here. No, sir. You can't wait here any longer. You're gonna have to come with us." And apparently there was a mistake. So, like, the person who was left on the bomber was supposed to die, but he didn't die because of a mishap in paperwork. So then one of, like, the bureaucrats, who is a figure from revolutionary France who was killed by the guillotine, he must go to Earth and then say, like, hey, you're going to have to come back. But the problem is that then we cut to the man we saw in the opening, and he's fallen. He found the girl, the radio operator, and now they have a charming little relationship. And then he goes like, "Wait a minute, I'm not going to go back. I have this." The movie then becomes like a kind of courtroom drama. Where then he has to appeal his, like, continued existence on Earth, and then, like, there's this entire thing where he has to gather witnesses, and, like, there's a doctor who he gets involved with. It is the strangest movie, and it's consistently delightful.
Okay. I gotta say, this sounds kind of incredible.
It is incredible. Like, it's really interesting. Like, the design of Heaven is just really fascinating. It's kind of like, it's kind of Art Deco-y mixed with, like, biblical imagery. Like, there's, like, the courtroom you see at the end, and it is just, like, this really impressive set they have there. And it is, like, the interesting thing the movie has, it kind of has, like, a reverse Wizard of Oz, whereas, like, Earth is all in color, but whenever you see, like, the afterlife, it's all in black and white.
Yeah.
And at one point, the French Revolutionary man comes down and say, "Oh, we wanted for Technicolor up there." And, like, all the performances are utterly wonderful. The movie ends with just a fascinating, like, argument about, like, about the nature of Britain and America. Like, at one point, you, like, they show you the jury, and it's a series of it's a jury made of people who are prejudiced against England, because the prosecutor was the first person that got shot by the British in the Revolutionary War, so he wants to, really hammer home the fact that the man who is on trial is British. And, like, you have, like, a Frenchman, you have, like, an Irishman, you have an Indian, and it's all about, like, the atrocities of the British Empire for a little bit. But then they replace it with an American jury, and then it gets kind of racist, because then the Indian is replaced with a black man, whilst all the others are replaced with immigrants.
Interesting.
So if any of this sounds fascinating to you, I would highly recommend it, because it was delightful from start to finish.
I'm definitely going to get around to it at some point. I haven't seen any Powell and Pressburger movies since we did our episode, but I really want to, because they are just incredible filmmakers.
This has just got some wonderful filmmaking in it. They're geniuses, I'm convinced.
Oddly, this one tends to be like one that's consistently, like, near the top of, like, when people are ranking their stuff.
I mean, as far as ambition is concerned, it's right up there. I can't say I think of the kind of movie this is. And I love it. I love it.
Alrighty then.
So, are we ready to talk about quasi-French New Wave men?
I certainly am. Are you ready, Dr. Reed?
Yeah.
That might be foreshadowing. Okay, what do we want? Well, do we kind of want to introduce Melville, or?
Yeah, I suppose. I actually shamefully, like, didn't do a lot of research on him before this, so.
Yeah, well, Melville is not his real name.
That is true. I did know that. He named it to as an homage to Herman Melville, the author of Moby Dick.
Yep. And, like, he was a part of the French Resistance.
Yeah.
He then, after the war, became a filmmaker, and he makes a very particular kind of movie about kind of like loose postmodern noirs. That kind of seems to be his thing.
Yeah.
But what do we want to talk about first?
I mean, I'm not too familiar with his filmography outside of these two movies. So I'm not really sure how to characterize it. But I guess let's start with Les Samouraï, if that's agreeable.
I can do that.
Which I have to give the French some credit. It's nice to see an umlaut above the I for once.
The French use umlaut. That's not rare. It's actually rarer than you might think. But, Reed, what did you think of Les Samouraï?
Okay, so I was really excited at the beginning because I thought this was going to be like a hitman drama until it kind of went downhill to make like I don't want to say a shitty courtroom drama because that's not what it was. But it's It's like
it kind of turns into a half-hearted police procedural at times.
Yeah.
I'm not quite as down on it, but I think the movie sort of seems like someone's reading to me their essay on deconstructing the film noir and the Hitman film.
Yeah,
that's kind of what the movie feels like to me. Like, it doesn't. Everything's muted. Everyone seems bored.
It seems like a movie you would make. I'm sorry to say, John.
Well, I did say it had film student-y elements to it.
I don't think everybody seems bored. Do you think so? I don't.
At times, I know. One of the things that sticks in my mind is that the sort of the quasi love interest has a gun pulled on her, and she just blindly just sort of looks up at him.
Well, I don't know. She's.
I'm not saying it's not thematically inappropriate. It's just kind of strange.
Yeah. All right, so just to preface this, so this movie follows Jeff Costello, who's a kind of a hitman for hire. He executes a job, but gets arrested by the police.
He kind of fucks up.
He sort of fucks up a little bit. He gets arrested, but he gets away, but the police are still kind of suspicious and on his tail. So he then becomes caught between the police and his employers who want to kill him. And it's a very kind of standard, Yakuza hitman kind of setup, except it's in France. And that's pretty much it. What?
Well, if I may add, that nightclub is nice and zazzy.
It is nice and zazzy.
And he has a bird.
And a police station.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Yeah, the police station also. The sets in this movie are kind of incredible.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
Yeah. As grayscale as a lot of these sets are, to suggest some noirness, they're good. They're good.
They're pretty good. The point of the movie seems to be isn't we have this really romantic view of the hitman and Yakuza cinema and just and hard-boiled detective thrillers. But here, they just show him as just a really sad, lonely, socially awkward man living alone, which is interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I was a little underwhelmed by this movie, as I think we all kind of were. I thought it was perfectly fine. I also think it's no Branded to Kill. I think in the pantheon of
nothing is Branded to Kill. We'll just set that straight.
Well, yeah, but also just I don't know. It to me it felt like it doesn't add a whole lot to the kind of hitman setup.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. Is I'm hey, oh look, he's falling in love. He's not supposed to. He's letting his emotions get in the way.
Is he even falling in love? I'm not so sure that's what's happening in this movie.
I don't know, man. I just think to myself, the third man did this years ago. But granted, my answer to any of these postmodern noirs is just go watch The Third Man. So take that with a grain of salt.
Well, you and I have never quite seen eye to eye on this. I don't have nearly as much of a problem with postmodern noirs as you do.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the ones I've seen, they don't quite know what's interesting about the noir, or at least what they think is interesting is stuff that noirs actually did.
Well, I don't
know. Shading and complexity.
I don't know. It's I think it works pretty well. Neo-noirs, there are a lot of them that I do enjoy. I love Pulp Fiction, which is another kind of riff on, not necessarily, I wouldn't call it a neo-noir, but it does riff on some noir conventions.
Oh, certainly. Well, all Tarantino movies are just a blender of pulp and exploitation cinema.
Yeah, and this movie definitely feels like a predecessor to that. It's
just pulling.
Yeah, it's very much
it's kind of pulling from pulpy detective and gangster.
It's a pastiche of those elements and American kind of gangster cinema and Japanese Yakuza cinema, all that kind of stuff kind of blended together.
France.
Yeah.
And the chase is in La Metro.
Yeah.
Instead of a car chase.
I guess just what is missing from this movie is just, I don't know, they make a big deal out of the solitude of the samurai and all that stuff. The movie literally opens with a quote about that on screen. And I don't know, I guess they just don't really delve into that much.
No, it's kind of just like the most they do is like him in his apartment looking bored. That's kind of like the most we get out of that. Is that like we know he's lonely because he always looks bored.
There is some stuff I like about this movie. Like, I do like that Melville like is so interested in like kind of the methodical nature of all this stuff. Like, you see him like very carefully like kind of all the steps he takes to ensure that he'll cover his tracks. Like, you know, going back to that his like quote unquote girlfriend's apartment and like turning the lights on and off at the appropriate time as her like other like paramour comes in to like and walk past him to like try and make sure his alibi checks out.
Yep.
I like all that stuff.
And then there's also like, I was here at 2.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Yeah. Yeah. I like all that stuff.
There's also like, I kind of like the police like hunt for him, where like they have like machines on everyone, and like they have like the map lights up.
Oh, the map!
That's a really interesting set piece. Like, I will say, this is kind of one of the things I see is that everyone's terrible at their job in this. This man is the most obvious assassin who's ever lived. The police try to bug him, and what they do is they just hang it up next to blinds. So all he has to do is pretty much open the window, and there it is.
Yeah, that's a bit strange.
So yeah, but I don't know. I just see. I don't want to call it half-baked, because like the look of the movie is sometimes pretty arresting. Like, the sets are great. Like, some of the cinematography is really creative.
I love the faces in this movie. That's another thing. He really loves the faces, and they're just incredible. They've got some very expressive things going on.
Oh yeah, so especially like the scene where like they bring everyone in and they're all wearing like fedoras and trench coats, and like they have to discover like who's who.
Yeah,
there is a really interesting thing of how, like, there's a woman who lies about seeing him, and then there's also, like, everyone's kind of in disagreement about who it is. Like, I think it's him. No, it can't be him.
I think he had a mustache.
Why did you shave your mustache? I never had a mustache. There are interesting things in it.
There's good stuff. I just think, on the whole, it's, you know, there are better examples of this kind of
Branded to Kill exists.
Branded to Kill exists. A lot of fun. Yeah, and I just think that movie is just a more compelling just takeoff on noir conventions and hitman conventions. But that's just my opinion. Reed, do you have anything else to say about this movie?
I don't know. I was disappointed.
Yeah.
And that's kind of sad, because it started so great. Like, the first 15 minutes of this were probably the best part of the movie. Yeah. And then it just went downhill when he was arrested. I'm like, oh, so this is a hack fraud?
Well, maybe it is intentional that he's terrible at his job, because there's a bunch of witnesses and he's really obvious.
Yeah. So. Well, I do love that bit where he's walking out of the nightclub after he's finished the job, and it's kind of a first-person thing. You see everyone turning their heads and looking right at the camera.
Yes,
that's very well done.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that was nice.
I guess my final thoughts is that Carol Reed was doing some of this stuff in the 40s.
Yes, he was. Yes,
he was. The film, the Third Man is all about taking pulp tropes. The main character of the Third Man is literally a pulp novelist.
Yeah.
I heard he's also got a train that runs to Munich at night.
Yeah. Well, that is just actual pulp. But regardless, there are interesting things in it. It's certainly
it's all right. I would never tell anyone don't see it. I think there's stuff to be gleaned here, but it's.
If you're really interested in noir tropes, this is an interesting example of that.
Yeah. But there are a lot more classic noirs I need to see, and I think maybe I should prioritize that.
Yeah.
And so should you. Hypothetical listener out there.
And me, because you're pointing directly at my screen, and the view I have.
Especially you.
Yeah, you're pointing at John on my screen, too.
But regardless, do you want to talk about Army of Shadows?
I would love to. Or more accurately, I would kind of like to, but be, again, slightly let down.
So I didn't miss
not protest.
So I didn't miss anything by instead watching The Soft Power of Shade.
Well, I wouldn't quite say you...
Oh, you didn't watch this movie? One real
No.
read? Okay. That's fine. Yeah, you didn't miss a ton.
I wouldn't quite say you've missed a ton. I've also think, like, I don't think this is a movie without merit.
Yes, yet again, good stuff in this movie, on the whole, slightly underwhelming, but we'll delve deeper on that in a minute.
Yeah.
So this movie follows a small band of fighters in the French Resistance during World War II, based on Melville's own experiences in the Resistance during the war. Basically, it starts with, what's his name? God, what is that guy?
I'm the one who actually speaks French here. Fuck me.
Hold on, I can look this up. Philippe Gerbier, or Gerbier, is that how you pronounce it?
Gerbier. Oui.
Gerbier. Okay, so Gerbier is captured by the Vichy police. He's sent to an internment camp. He escapes, and then you pick up the thread with him leading a small band of resistance members, and basically the movie follows their kind of day-to-day exploits as they evade capture, or sometimes are captured, and execute small strikes and small operations and try to avoid detection. Basically, a kind of just plotless, kind of meandering look at life in the Resistance.
I will say this, like, I can't quite say I'm an expert on this sort of thing, but that's a pretty cushy-looking concentration camp.
Well, okay. Well, I mean, you know, they're French nationals, so I guess maybe they were a little...
I suppose.
I don't know, I can't speak to that. There's a lot of interesting stuff in this movie. One thing I really, really like about it is that it doesn't romanticize the Resistance, like, at all. Like, one of the first things you see them do is they have to kill a member who betrayed them, and, like, they can't shoot him because the hideout is, like, close to, a family that's, like, living in the next room, so they literally have to, like...
shit, there wasn't a family here last time!
So, like, they have to, like, wrap a towel around his neck and strangle him.
And it's just really awkward, and, like, there's kind of, like, a trepidation about it that's really interesting.
Yeah.
There's also, like, they also have, like, the shoot, like, one of the people in the Resistance later.
Yeah.
As far as, like, this sort of, mostly due to internal politics, it seems.
Yeah. And there's also, that great sequence where they, like, they go to rescue their comrade who's being tortured, but they can't save him because the doctor literally says, like, he's not suitable for transport. Like, I can't let you transport a dying man. So they just have to leave him there.
Yep. Yeah, there's kind of it's just a movie made from, like, strange, bittersweet moments. Like, I think one of my favorite scenes is, like, when, like, right after he escapes from, I think they take him to a hotel and he's under guard, and he escapes and he runs into a barber shop, and, like, you see that, like, they're listening to the propaganda radio. There's, like, a Vichy French propaganda poster on the wall, and, like, they just give me a shave. Yeah. And there's kind of, like, that trepidation of, like, he's getting shaved by a Nazi, but then at the end, like, take my coat. It's not much, but it's all I have.
Yeah.
I just think it's a wonderful little scene.
Yeah. There's lots of great stuff like that kind of scattered throughout this movie. This movie is long and kind of boring sometimes.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing, like, a lot of the things in the movie, I kind of like, yeah, you would kind of get this from any sort of memoir about the French Resistance. I mean, I don't think we're bringing really anything new to the table.
I don't know if I can say that. I haven't read or seen too much about the French Resistance in general, so I can't really speak to that. I don't know. I think it's an interesting document of that time and that place, and they kind of do a thing at the end where they're like, all these people died. We're just going to tell you, like, how they died.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and you really do get the sense that, like, this is being made by someone who kind of went through this stuff and is able to look at it.
Like a memoir.
Yeah, it does feel like a memoir, and it's all good stuff.
That's good.
I don't know. I'm struggling to find things to say about it, just because it's not super compelling after a while.
Yeah, it is just the sort of thing where it's. I can't just say to myself like, yeah, French Resistance was hard, Nazis bad. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't want to belittle it because like this guy actually like did go through this stuff, but
he
like,
did, but I think, yeah, but it's a sort of, it's just kind of difficult, especially because like we have so many World War II movies now,
yeah,
and there have just been so many interesting things said about the war. And granted, I just think there are more interesting memoirs out there.
Yeah, well, that's probably true. I don't know. I think it is nice to get a World War II movie without any like real like kind of flag wavy kind of stuff. Like, you know, this is what happened.
The flag waving that is in there just kind of seems like sad and bittersweet.
Yeah, they do kind of. Actually, this movie was like kind of reviled in France for a while, just because it came out at a time when Charles de Gaulle was very unpopular, and this movie does kind of. I wouldn't say go out of its way, but this movie does kind of present Charles de Gaulle as a celebratory figure to a certain degree.
Yeah, well, the thing about like de Gaulle was. At this point, like, de Gaulle was pretty much only a radio announcer. Like, that was pretty much it. Like, he declared himself leader of the French, and, well, apparently FDR hated him. And, like, Churchill was like, okay, fine, just do your radio broadcast, let's just do this shit.
Yeah.
And, like, I think at this point, like, the French resistance was still, like, this really loose, unorganized thing. It wasn't until, like, later in the war where it finally became, like, a force to actually be reckoned with. And, like, it kind of captured that. There is kind of, like, a sense of, like, fatalist hopelessness that comes out of it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, especially, like, the glory of the French resistance we have, like, in our collective culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of interesting moments. It's a compelling look at, like, you know, life in the war and, you know, life under this regime. I think its portrait of Vichy France is really interesting.
Yeah, because it's always about, like, occupied Paris and so
yeah.
Glorious bastards in our mind. But no, this is in Vichy France. This is the actual French government.
Yeah,
and,
you see what it's like to kind of have your own government, like, turning against you. Like, that's all fascinating stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, interesting fact, more French fought for the Axis by the end of the war.
Well,
which I think is something that adds just another bittersweet pang to this movie.
Yeah. So I don't know. If it sounds interesting, like worth checking out, I'm not sure I would say it's essential by any means.
No, I just got to say there are more interesting World War II movies.
Yeah. I mean, we watched maybe the best one ever made earlier this summer, so I think Life and Death of Colonel Blimp has, like, set such a high bar for us.
Well, the Life and Death of Colonel Blimp is just such, and especially that's not just World War II. That's like that's an entire history of the 20th century in Britain as well, and everything else just kind of seems the pale in comparison. Yeah. But regardless, I just say, like, there are more interesting memoirs about World War II out there.
Well, if you know what any of them are, perhaps send them our way, because I'm not familiar with any of them.
Well, mine are about Nazis. Well, the most interesting one was written by Nazis, so that's the problem.
All right. So that's Army of Shadows. We just didn't have a lot to say this week.
It is what it is. It's kind of loose musings on the French Resistance, kind of through a postmodern lens.
Yeah.
It exists.
So that's that. Such high praise. What are we going to do next time?
Are we going to leave the continent, or are we going to stay?
Well, I don't know. I had been thinking about maybe we could do some Truffaut next week. Okay, what?
It's kind of like part of me just wants to escape France.
Okay. That's understandable.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I got Fellini, I got Antonioni, I got Werner Herzog, I've got Ozu, I've got there's another Japanese filmmaker I was thinking of. He made Sancho the Bailiff and something else.
I think we finally just need to watch 8.5.
Okay, all right, I am up for this.
I think we need to finally get that. What else would you think?
Well, I would say La Dolce Vita, but that movie is 3 hours long.
Fuck! Yeah, because I think if we don't do 8.5 now, I don't know when else we're going to do it.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do 8.5. That movie is also kind of long, not as long, but
no, it's a little bit shorter than that.
It's doable. It's not 3 hours. I really want to watch La Dolce Vita though.
That's the issue.
Let's see. We could do La Strada. That movie's not that long. Unless you just want to get into his bizarre period with like Fellini Satyricon and that kind of thing, which I'm not so sure that would be the best idea.
I don't think we're ready for that.
Are we ever ready for that?
Let's just do La Strada. La
Strada, yeah.
This sounds interesting.
Okay. So 8.5 and La Strada.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Okay. That sounds good to me.
And maybe I'll slip in La Dolce Vita if I can find the time.
Yeah. Y'all are starting school this week, so...
Oh, yes, I am.
There's no crying in school, Reed!
Oh, there's lots of crying in school.
Oh shit! Of course there.
There's entirely too much of it. Okay.
You have to cry over an assignment in my collegiate year, so...
Yeah. All right. Fellini, coming your way. La Strada and 8.5. Hopefully we will not die on the way. So, all right.
Again, yeah.
Thanks, everyone. And I bid you adieu.
As we welcome us as we go to the peninsula.
Sure.
Adieu.
Adieu. Give me 1 second. Nope, not Army of Darkness. That's an Evil Dead movie. Elevator music. Okay.
Werner Herzog.
You want to do Werner Herzog?
I mean, it seems like it sounds like it's what a certain anonymous collective of people, the majority of what they want.
He's quoting Herzog in an interview about wrestling.
Oh.